Tuning in hopefully from all over the world. Firstly, to let you know, this event will be recorded and we want it to be a lively conversation. So don't be shy and feel free to still be yourself despite the rolling format of a Zoom webinar. This is. Welcome to Creativity, Tourism and Community. My name is Vere Van Gool. I'm a curator and writer currently based in Paris. I've worked for various museums and cultural institutions around the world, and it's an honor to moderate this conversation for Praxis, an art and culture catalyst based in Oslo, Norway. Praxis is unique because it creates situations that support the development through exchange across disciplines, most often in connection with the topic that Praxis considers important. And this event thus marks the start of a larger of such important projects called An Urgent Situation, Rethinking Tourism Through Architecture, Art and Community. And it's actually part of a 3-phase setup. This is the second of 5 panel discussions. There's also an online working group, and there will be a real-life residency in Samongan Haven in Bali, Indonesia. So we hope that this talk series will set a really strong foundation for all attendees, but also the thinking at large about what the intersection between creativity, tourism, and community can be. First of all, before I introduce the speakers, I want to give a big shout out and thank you to Nicholas Jones and Charlotte Taylor and the team at Praxis who have led the way on this project, and Syowia Kyambi, an interdisciplinary artist and curator and founder of Untethered Magic, who is joining us from Kenya, Astrid Fadnes, an architect, writer, and head of communications at Pikene, Broen, who's joining us all the way from north Norway, and Elizabeth Monoian and Robert Ferry, who are founders and directors of the Land Art Generator Initiative, who are joining us in typical COVID Zoom on the run fashion in a few minutes. So the words creativity, tourism, and community obviously bring up a lot of questions, a lot of similarities, a lot of kind of tension. And in a way, we're trying tonight to discuss the forces both in a good and both in maybe a somewhat, more challenging understanding of how we got to the world today and what lessons we can learn from the practice of an interdisciplinary artist, somebody who is representing work more on a government layer, and somebody who's really working in a design field, and try to see what lessons there are to be learned and how we can preserve a great future in which we can meaningfully travel and connect authentically, and maybe have a kind of preservation spin on tourism. So the event will go as follows. There'll be 3 presentations. We're starting with Syowia, followed by Astrid, then by Lagi, and that will be followed by a panel discussion. Obviously, this is a Zoom format, so it doesn't have the complete live synergy for us in a room to poke each other with questions throughout. But if anything comes up, feel free to drop a note in the chat. And we want to keep this conversation as light and as lively as possible. And that really is more fun if everybody participates. And that's also to the 3 speakers. Please feel free to bug everybody, because the most important thing is that I should be talking least and you guys have the conversation. And yeah, thank you all for joining. So I'm going to hand the virtual mic over to Syowia, and please tell us where you are and who you are.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you so much. My name is Syowia Kyambi. I'm going to jump right in and share my screen with you all. You can let me know that you can see it. Is that okay for everybody? And you can hear me well as well. Super. So I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya, and together with Kiberu and myself, we formed Untethered Magic. Untethered Magic is based in Nairobi. It's also the space where we live and work. It's really like the kitchen, as you can see here, is like the hub and heart of our space. It was built in late 2019 and 2020, and I moved to this particular space oh gosh, towards the end of 2017. So it's a very short time frame that we're talking about. And Untethered Magic's goal is really to supplement a space for process and thinking and not necessarily production. To give you guys a little bit of background in terms of Kenya and East Africa, a lot of the contemporary art scene has been built on an old narrative of what contemporary African art should be, coming from like the idea of primitive African art, and then going into more very commercialized ways of thinking and making art. Obviously, that's important because you need a space to put bread on the table and make a living, but there's less foundation in terms of process or public art, very little funding from the Kenyan government in terms of contemporary conceptual work, and definitely very little for ephemeral work. My own practice is in performance and installation work. I work a lot with history and memory and identity. And I use performances inside of large-scale installations to tell a story and to change a narrative or to highlight narratives that aren't discussed. And Vere Van Gool is a photographer and also a videographer. And Vere is also a sound producer and works with music and making beats. He used to do DJ work and also ran a radio program. Vere and Vere are in their like mid-20s, late 20s, and I'm 42. And also in terms of the Kenyan kind of traditional family setup, living and working together is not the norm in the country that we live in. We live together also with my partner, Kieran from Ireland, and also my son, who's now 15, almost 16. So it's quite an unusual dynamic. And I wanted to share a little bit about the first structure I built. This was before Vere and Vere arrived on the location. And this image is quite dear to me. I've been recently writing for a publication in Performing Borders, and it's all about holding space and the effort that it takes to hold space. And in the early days, I had no wall, no gate, no fence, and I'm just behind the national park. And the other edge of the compound, it's an acre, is a gorge and a river. And this river leads towards Adi River, which connects to Tana River, which connects to the Indian Ocean. And the gorge is also part of the Rift Valley. So we're in Maasai land. And obviously Mabati, the corrugated sheet, is really quick way of building, not necessarily the most great in terms of weather. You have to insulate it if you don't want to freeze or boil. But it was a fast way for me to move, and really Untethered Magic has always been a sanctuary and a space, kind of a safety. People who've ended up here, we've hosted a couple of residencies, and it's always been in the need for looking for a safe space to think and be in. I'll share with you a little bit about what it looks like right now, which is super hot. And you can see the city, I think. You can see that a little bit. So it's very dry, really. Oh, that's not working. Oh, now it is. Hang on a second. Take a minute to load. It can be very lush. So the landscape, it's all Maasai land, and Rongai, we're kind of 20 minutes out from the city. The closest city is called Rongai, Ongata Rongai. And Rongai is very different from our location. It's just a little bit of a way to give you a feeling. It's a very busy town. It's a very unique town because it kind of boomed in well, 2007, 2006. It became very fast growing space because land was really affordable. And then people called it the diaspora for two reasons. One is that it took a really long time to get there back in the day. So it's not technically not part of the city, not part of Nairobi. It's part of Kajiado County, which is a different county. And you have kind of hardware shops, marketplaces, supermarkets, fashion shops, all in one, whereas a lot of other kind of suburbs or spaces have like just like more living environment of like not so much of the hardware shops. And then a lot of musicians have come up from Rongai, a lot of creatives have come up from Rongai because it's affordable space to live in. And again, it's got like a very mixed group of people living there. It's not based along tribal lines, which a lot of the spaces in Nairobi are. And I just want to share with you kind of a little bit of a plan for, it's hard to understand. So the main road is on this side and the river is on the right of you at the other side of the compound. So it's a long and narrow strip. But the buildings have been built kind of out of necessity. Behind me is my studio, which is a mobile structure. I've always been really interested in mobile structures and fast builds and builds that can shift and become fluid. Untethered Magic is really grounded in the idea of things being constantly fluid. This is the kitchen and the deck, which is like really the heart of the space and the most public space. This is the studio. This is where Kibe and Kiberu are at the moment, which is actually the first image I showed you earlier. We have an outdoor shower, and then I built kind of this structure first, and then the kitchen and the other bedroom came later, and my son's bedroom came much later. So it's in an informal kind of traditional architecture of a horseshoe, and as buildings being built as needed. So you're constantly inside and outside of your space, which is quite a unique experience. And there's a constant navigation with nature. I'd like to maybe hop just and share with you guys a little bit about the recent building. We've been funded by the African Arts Fund with some core funding to build A-frames, which are small structures that are closer to the side of the gorge now. And they are, oh, I can just share with you a few. Give me a moment. The A-frames are really built in a fast way. This was what you're seeing is like 6 weeks of building. There's 6 of them. The wood is actually recycled from another house that was demolished, where I got access to the floorboards and also windows. And this model is twofold. It's basically for residency programs and also for renting out for getaway weekend, which is part of our business model. So the tourism that we're kind of thinking about is really local tourism. There's a history in Kenya for the touristic market to really be focused on expatriates coming in and foreigners traveling, and a way different kind of budget. The hotels in our neighborhood, they all have $150 per night to about $100 per night. Tourism is still really not very affordable for like middle income Kenyans. And so part of our plan is to really be making our spaces affordable. We're at 2,500 Kenyan shillings a night. That's like 25 euros, dollars around about. And we have an Untethered Magic social responsibility budget within that, where the percentage of that goes into us being able to host artists, local artists, who we kind of identify as really benefiting from having time out and really benefiting from not necessarily having to produce, but actually having a space to dialogue, think and talk. I'm going to hop out of this now. The other image I really wanted to share with you, which keeps coming back into my thoughts, is from a Tim Ingold article called, oh, the one, I have to remember that, sorry, One World Anthropology. And really for me, the figure on the right is where I'm strongly able to identify kind of this negotiation with being with the land and working. You're not sitting on top of it. You're kind of ingrained into the land and the knowledge of the body and the land, and kind of this, maybe it's inherited knowledge, maybe it's a different level of consciousness, And it's a way I wasn't thinking when I studied art at the Art Institute of Chicago, and left Chicago in 2002, 3. And I've always wanted to create a space, a residency space, but my mind back then and for 10 years following was always still importing a kind of Western ideal of structure and design. I still thought in terms of one building encompassing everything. I remember in 1999 in Chicago, visiting a museum in somebody's home. Some toy I played with as a child, which was a musical instrument. With it, and my professor was like, had a heart attack. I was like, "What are you doing? Don't do that." And it was my first kind of real shock in terms of relationship to museum space and relationship to cultural space, and this distance between the body and the action and the use of the object, and that there's a separation. And for me, untethered magic is really not a separation. There's a deep ingrained living and working, which can be hard, but it's laborious. And it's the same with nature, because we're behind the national park and also in conjunction with Silola Sanctuary. It's really a constant navigation with the wildlife, and really we're in their territory. Past residencies, firstly, I wanted to just bring up the archive. The archive was a residency we did pre-COVID in January 2020, together with the Center for Art, Design and Social Research. I was a fellow with them for 2 years prior to this time. And they were keen on hosting the work in Nairobi. And we had 34 different people from all over the world, Russia, China, Tanzania, South Africa, Jamaica, Cuba. So a very widespread and not the usual relation to kind of exchange and residencies, where it seems always from global North and global South meeting, but more ingrained. And the fellows, there were kind of open call slots for East African artists and thinkers and creatives to also apply. And 3 of those have now continued to be fellows with them, which for us is a great kind of, yeah, it's had a start access to a community and a group of people who may not have applied, who may not be nominated, who may not be known. I think my internet's lagging a little bit. That's Lisa Brock, the Art Institute of Chicago, giving us a talk about Pan-Africanism and the African continent. And then the second, the curatorial, I also do curatorial work. And it was an exhibition with the Biennale in Dresden, but we had to cancel because the first 2 people arrived the day we had a first COVID case in Kenya, and it happened to be in Rongai, just down the street from where we are. And Sauti Mustuni is a project of Kibe and Kiberus. It's a radio program. You can check out the link. I'm sure maybe there's a way to share this Padlet to the public, because I'm happy for them to click on the things and access them. And the other thing we've been working on is Untethered Magic. It's an ongoing project. It's a kind of fellowship. We've really seen the need for mentorship, and the need for mentorship within the context of the Global South, and the need for emerging artists who've had some experience to have the opportunity to engage with mentors for a span of 2 years. And this is ongoing, and obviously autonomy is at the core of our thinking. We are really keen to be able to fund our own events. We're also interested in permaculture and interested in getting rainwater catchment and solar catchment so that we can get more and more off the grid, but also in terms of the history of how funding has taken place for the arts in East Africa. There used to be a number of residencies in the early 2000s. Actually, that's not true. In like kind of the funding agencies changed their agenda, so those all collapsed, and there's only a few, like 1 or 2 residencies, and they're both focused on production. So it's really important for us to also have our own autonomy. I think I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing this with us. I really loved how we navigated, kind of similarly to how you were discussing the importance of the setup of your space, that the setup of the presentation also allowed for us to flow through these different aspects of your practice. I'm super curious to learn more about some of the unexpected things that you've encountered in building this untethered magic, but we'll come to that at the Q&A. Speaking of the Western model of gathering and navigating the wildlife and working and learning from the land up, our next speaker is based completely somewhere else in the northern part of Norway, very close to the Russian and the Finnish border. It is Astrid Fadnes, who is head of communications of the curatorial collective Pikene Broen. I'm sure she can pronounce it better than I can. And I'm super excited to learn more about what you guys are doing and the cultural projects that you have set up, and specifically also understanding what that relationship is between such different climates and this similar idea of, yeah, curating together. Anyway, I'm handing the mic over to you, Astrid.
Thank you. Let me see, I will just share my screen here. And can you see my screen? Yes, good. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Praxis, for inviting us into this talk series. My name is Astrid Fadnes, and I'm an architect and an art and architecture critic, and I'm also a part of the team in Pikene Broen. And it's Pikene Broen that I'm going to, and our work and our aims that I'm going to present now for you. So shortly, Pikene Broen is a collective of curators and producers based in the northeastern part of Kirkenes, of the town Kirkenes. And to just give you a view of how Kirkenes looks like, this is a picture of the town, which has around 10,000 inhabitants, including the whole municipality. And it's also a place that is located in the very outskirts of Norway, which leads to questions about is Kirkenes being a periphery? But as you can see on the map, it's also, one could also say that Kirkenes is also a center in the borderlands, being located only 15 kilometers from the Russian border and 50 kilometers from the Finnish border, and making Kirkenes into an ideal place for cross-border collaboration and cultural exchange in the Arctic. And it's also worth mentioning that this Arctic territory and landscape is also a contested landscape and territory, having the indigenous people of the Samis living here for centuries, living out of reindeer herding and fishing, and it also being an area with very rich natural resources, not only in the Barents Sea, but also in the mountains, which lead me to the history, back to the very beginning of and the foundation of Kirkenes as a town, which was in 1906, when an iron ore was discovered, and a mining company was founded, and also created a need for labor force, which also led to the founding of Kirkenes as a town. However, in 1996, the mining company shuts down, which leads to a lot of local discussions like how is the future of Kirkenes going to be? What are the inhabitants of Kirkenes going to live from? Will Kirkenes maintain after the mine shutting down? And this made an urge of a lot of new businesses and initiatives, tourism being one of them. And also it's the year when Pikene på Broen, that can be translated into the girls on the bridge, was started by 7 female artists in Kirkenes, where the aim is to use contemporary art and culture as a way to build bridges, one could say, and in the meaning not only to build bridges across the national borders, here showed with the image of the border posts that you can find along the Russian-Norwegian border, but also to build bridges between different sectors in the locally, in between industries and businesses locally in Kirkenes and the region. And just to give you say a few words about the tourism business and industry in Kirkenes. So since 1996, the tourism has grown, and especially the 10 to 12 past years, with the special growth in the winter tourism, it being kind of an Arctic destination, offering snow and northern lights and snow hotel, king crab safari, and also being a town which is provided with tourist groups every day, because the Norwegian ship that sails along the Norwegian coast, Hurtigruten, has its end stop in Kirkenes. And especially the last year, there has been a growth in Asian tourism, who tend to leave the most money. So Asian tourism has been also an important market for the tourist industry to aim for. But at the same time, there has been lifted discussions also before Corona about how to create a sustainable tourist industry, and also after the pandemic hitting the tourist industry hard, also here in Kirkenes. It also has led to a focus and discussions on how to focus on more national and local tourism. So I'm going to introduce Pikene på Broen and our work a little bit. Just briefly, we have Terminal B, which is our gallery space in the very center of Kirkenes town, which hosts exhibitions, performances, concerts, talks and debates, and also workshops, and has become a meeting place, and also obviously an art space in the city center of Kirkenes, with an all year round program. And apart from the gallery, an important part of our work is the festival Barents Spektakel, which is an annual event that also has the aim to build cultural bridges across real and imaginary boundaries. It's a 5-day festival and can be viewed as a cultural political cocktail of contemporary art, music, theater, performances, literature, architecture, seminars, debates, and was first started in 2004. And this upcoming year, 2022, will be the 18th edition of the festival. So the festival also aims to lift current issues that circles around the Barents region and the high north in general. And every year there is also a different topic lifted in the festival. Like in 2019, they named the festival the world's northernmost Chinatown, lifting issues and speculations related to how there can be possible relations and collaboration between Kirkenes and China as the ice sea is melting and opening up a new shipping route, the Polar Silk Road. Transporter Cafe is a debate program that is also part of the festival and the all year round program, lifting discussions related also to the current political and cultural issues, and pushing the boundaries on topics relevant to the North. There is also a bar concept that is a part of the festival program, becoming both a social meeting place and a place for events and debates. And in general, one can say that the festival has become an important five-day event in Kirkenes, which attracts both visitors, tourists, and both nationally and internationally, but also engages and activates the local inhabitants in the social meeting places and program and activities. And then finally, Pikene på Broen also organizes an international artist in residency program. It's a program that facilitates artistical research in the region and aims for new art production and creating stories about the High North. And through the residency, the artists gain insights into work and the issues that are both locally rooted, but at the same time often also has a global relevance. And this residency program, one could say, it also makes Pikene på Broen into a small-scale tour operator ourselves, as well as also having collaborations with local tour operators. So to sum up a little bit about the aims of the work of Pikene på Broen, it is to both connect with the history, the place, being a place where borders meet, and also to not least create a local meeting place. And it's also to connect with history, as mentioned. As an example there, this is the Boris Gleb bar, which is actually a bar that existed during the Cold War for 59 days, just on the border between Russia and Norway, creating kind of a free space for Russians and Norwegians to meet and to drink vodka and dance and share and debate. And cinema was a part of it, exhibitions, but it was shut down after the 59 days. But still today, people in Kirkenes remain with these memories from this bar. And in 2020, the Bar and Spectacle Festival kind of reopened this Boris Gleb bar for 5 days and also recreated this meeting space between neighbors. Another aim, one could say, for Pikene på Broen is also to make the use of existing and empty buildings and spaces. One could view this as kind of a place-making tool and to make an advantage and exploring the potential of empty buildings. And then I would also mention as an example an ongoing project, which we have called the Art Path, because most of the projects we run, the exhibitions and the festivals, are temporary projects, while the Art Path is a project where we want to look into how to make the temporary more permanent, also in a way to connect with locals and to attract visitors, and also a way to connect visitors with the history of the place and with storytelling and to create some kind of meaning or value by the mean of art in public space and in and around Kirkenes. And then finally, I just wanted to share some kind of the current discussions that are ongoing at Pikene på Broen now with the this year's festival that we arranged in 2021 being a very special one due to the pandemic, and where we had to rethink how to create this and to maintain the social meeting places, where the obvious kind of using digital tools was a way to maintain the connection with our Russian partners and Russian cities, with events and art projects happening parallel in Kirkenes as well in different Russian cities, but also to think more locally and to think how to maintain the local meeting places for the inhabitants in Kirkenes, where, for example, the taxi takeaway project of the KM Bark was a way to, two artists looked into local food in the area and then used the space of the taxi central in Kirkenes to distribute the food, which was also a part of their art project. So, so we can say, but with these new experiences, it's not necessarily a goal that we want to go back to normal after or now as Norway and other countries are reopening, but rather to continue the discussions that were lifted during the pandemic, and also to continue to be a driving force for art and culture, and use art and culture to as an aim to connect with history, to the place and to people, and of course also to put Kirkenes on the map, one could say, and at the same time strengthen and participate in the local community with the aim of, and also the, one could say, to make the periphery into a center for both locals and for visitors. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Astrid. Periphery as well as borders that maybe previously to COVID weren't as visible, similar to other parts in the world, but all of a sudden with each country having different COVID protocols, these regions must have gone through quite some political changes. I also loved hearing about how you're anticipating the future, even though it's negative that obviously snow is melting, but it does perhaps allow for points of connections with other parts of the world. And I think it's very, very smart. It did bring me to wonder, especially your last bits of putting Kirkenes, I will never be able to pronounce this, on the map, if that is government-sponsored promo language, or if there is a real political mission and social urgency towards putting this place on the map. But speaking of this intersection between smaller skills and larger skills, I would like to introduce Elizabeth and Robert of the Land Art Generator Initiative, which is a US-based organization that brings together artists, architects, scientists, landscape architects, and engineers to collaborate on public art installations that also operate with utility clean energy. I'm sure you guys can give a better explanation of what that is, but it's super exciting to have you guys here and share a little bit more of the kind of international projects also that you've been doing and tackling this idea of sustainable tourism, and if that is even possible or perhaps an oxymoron on its own. So Elizabeth and Robert, thank you so much for joining, and I am handing this virtual mic over to you guys.
Super, thank you. We're going to share our screen. Give us 1 second.
And your explanation was perfect, spot on. And hopefully now you should see.
Great. Well, what we're going to do in our few minutes is provide a little bit of historic and cultural context that then leads to the founding of the Land Art Generator Initiative, and a quick overview of some of the programming we've developed over the last decade.
So Astrid mentioned building bridges, and the bridges that we're building are between our energy and our production and consumption and human culture. If you go back more than a century with us really quickly here, we can remember the beginning of electrification, and electricity was new and amazing. And you remember the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, which was the first big celebration of this new technology. And architects and engineers and artists even were involved in the birth of this technology. You can see here a power plant in the heart of Lisbon, which was designed to be a beautiful addition to the landscape and the urban context. And all of these old, beautiful power plants are being repurposed into new uses, like the Tate Modern, for example. But as we got our coal-fired power plants out of our cities, for good reason, that relationship between human culture and our energy was severed. And that relationship has continued to be lacking in the new energy landscapes as we tackle the climate crisis. And that's really at the heart of the work that Elizabeth and I are engaged in the Land Art Generator Initiative, thinking about the importance of how the energy can again become something that is celebrated in human culture, and perhaps even these new energy landscapes can start to become cultural destinations in a way.
In 2008, we were living in Dubai and really thinking through the pinch points. What are those problems that are creating a lack of will to jump into the energy transition the way that we need to globally? And as we were sort of deep diving those thoughts, we thought, well, what if we brought creatives to the helm of this conversation and invited them to reimagine our energy landscapes as places of art, places of wow, placemaking tools, and potential massive tourist destinations. So to jumpstart it, we've been holding international design competitions. We started in the United Arab Emirates because we were based there, so sites in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And then every 2 years, and now more a trajectory of every year, we are invited to a different city around the world. We choose a design site within that city that makes sense for hosting such a competition, and we put out a call to the world asking for interdisciplinary teams. For every year, we shift the site typology. So urban gateways to a landfill, to a brownfield site, coastal site, master planning site. Back to Abu Dhabi in 2019, we were at a gateway to a development. Fly Ranch is a 4,000-acre site completely off-grid, owned by Burning Man, so a very different design brief and scale. And this year, or next year rather, we're working in Mannheim, Germany, which is where we're sitting today. But we also hold invited competitions, and we work in many other models, participatory design, we do educational programming, and we work with communities around the world.
We're going to show you just very quickly some of the examples of the designs that have come into our international open call competition. We're going to start by showing the standard photovoltaic panel. If you close your eyes and you think of a solar panel, this is probably what pops into your mind. But you give this technology to an artist working with an engineer and you get energy duck. So everybody loves a duck. And why not have it be a cultural attractor that powers an entire neighborhood? And it's also a battery as well to deal with the duck curve of renewable energy intermittency. So that's a whole conversation we could have. Here's another example of a bifacial solar panel incorporated into this artwork for Masdar City in Abu Dhabi. That is a clutch of falcon eggs scaled way up to celebrate the importance of the falcon for the culture, and it creates these beautiful places to walk through. But you don't need to limit your creativity to those blue solar panels. You can now use all sorts of technologies that are out on the market, like this beautiful golden tinted polycrystalline, and you can laminate solar panels to look like pretty much anything you want. Here's an example of the use of that golden photovoltaic to create a new photovoltaic sun for the city of Abu Dhabi, generates enough electricity for 100 homes. Here's a stream of energy flowing off of a new hotel in St. Kilda Triangle outside Melbourne, Australia. And so this starts to open up the conversation for how hotels and resorts who aspire to support regenerative tourism or sustainable tourism can incorporate beautiful works of renewable energy art to power the hotel and the experience of the guests while also creating beautiful experiences. organic photovoltaics and dye-sensitized solar cells are flexible, all the colors of the rainbow, semi-translucent. You can see here how beautiful a power plant can be. This is a power plant where you can take your family for a picnic. Solar thermal technology is incorporated into the solar hourglass. It's an hourglass to remind us that there's still time to avert the worst effects of climate change if we can act together. So this is a positive and inspiring message for what the beauty of our post-carbon future can be, rather than dwell too much on the doom and the gloom of the science communications of rising sea levels, et cetera.
Which is all real.
It's all real, but if we just focus on the downer stuff, then we can't build the political will to action. We need to create desire. We need to create a world for people, something to run towards rather than just run away from. And then we'll show some quick examples of the Logi 2020 outcomes for Fly Ranch in Nevada. This is the winning entry. It incorporates local materials to create these educational shelters and composting toilet area for the site to bring those systems to the site in a sustainable way. Also provides habitat for local species.
And just quickly to note, for the Logi 2020 Fly Ranch design brief, we opened up the design brief to not just energy technologies, but because they're off-grid and 4,000 acres, they need all systems as they work towards year-round programming. So shelter, agriculture, water, waste, compost management, as well as energy infrastructure done in very culturally relevant and site-specific ways.
So these all could be classified under the category of regenerative artwork that gives back over time more than the energy that goes into its creation. Here's an example of what a typical community solar installation looks like, and
not one of ours, not a land art generator.
No, and a destination may want to power itself with something like this, and while that does reduce the carbon footprint of a place, it also does a larger disservice to the overall energy transition movement if this is what people think of when they think of a post-carbon future. So we like to work with communities and co-design what renewable energy looks like for them. And it's an opportunity to tell stories. The solar mural program that we have launched in San Antonio, Texas, these are two examples of that, is showing the way to a future where our energy systems can be integrated into our placemaking strategies.
And designed by local communities. So it's really, as we transition off fossil fuels, we have a real opportunity to put local communities and at the helm of this conversation and making decisions that are relevant for their own communities.
Yeah, what does solar look like for your town? What does it look like in all the parts of the world? It shouldn't be a cookie cutter approach and look the same everywhere. It should be reflective of culture.
And in fact, all of the research strongly points towards the possibility of system failures if local community hasn't been involved in conversations from day one. That could be a not in my backyard response. That could be the potential for a lack of understanding of how to maintain these systems. There's a wide range of reasons why the systems will fail if local community is not involved. So in our design brief, we always encourage local community to participate in helping us draft, and we create educational programming that's distributed around the world to help engage with local communities.
And that's our last slide.
You're right on the dot with the timer there. Thank you so much. It's really interesting to see, especially your presentation as a last of the two others, and to have a very positive spin on some of the kind of darker forces that have been shaping our future. And I really like this idea that you're saying, in a way, there is a crisis, let's not walk away from it, but let's run towards it. And I think this proactiveness is actually something that comes across in all of the practices of the kind of three panelists today. And I think that's also something that I would love to discuss, this like feeling of urgency that the future is ours, and how can we operate through different skills to tackle it and grab it. As I said, the event is part of a larger project, which is rethinking tourism through architecture, art, and community. And There are a few collaborators that have helped kind of lay the groundwork for this. And I want to give a special shout out to those, and I've seen some of them join this conversation, so I'd love to be in dialogue with you guys later as well and hear your questions. First of all, Raoul Architecture Lab, which is an Oslo-based not-for-profit collective that works at the intersection of architecture arts, urban interventions, and social science. Don Lawrence, an award-winning practicing architect based in Oslo, where many of his projects operate between art and architecture. Tanya Torjassen, an artist who focuses on environments and knowledge systems, and Samon Haven, a socially responsible destination that prioritizes culture, community, and conversation. So I think for me, before we jump into the panel discussion, I would just like to respond a little bit to your three presentations and then kick off with some very simple questions, because often those are the hardest to answer. I think what's really interesting is kind of from working with on such a local scale in terms of Syowia's practice, where literally the kind of vegetation can inform how a community will be shaped throughout different buildings, to making an icy Nordic situation a tourist attraction, where I bet there are more tourists than residents in a way, with just 10K permanent residents, and I bet a lot flying through, or rather sailing through. And I guess also you guys, in a way, some of the installations from Lagi, it kind of looks as if it might be flying in, or landed from, you know, the sky above as some super magic solution to climate change that just landed in a desert in near Abu Dhabi, or maybe in a desert near southern Arizona. I think one of the questions that I, as a curator, always ask, and given this, I also have an architecture background, and I spend most of my architecture education kind of rebelling against this idea that we should build something, we should come up with a solution, we should invent something on top of something to make something better. And I think this also maybe is a very Western way of education. It's a very Western way of thinking. I think it's exciting to see the three of your practices operate very differently. And one of the key things that I think hasn't been addressed in your presentations, but I would love to discuss with you guys, is not necessarily dwelling on the negative, but also this idea of what tourism actually means in maybe not this year, but in 10 years from now, where we've had super nationalistic politics shaping from the US to Europe to Southeast Asia to basically all parts of the world. And simultaneously, we find ourselves as humans, and most of us privileged enough to operate within these borders or across these borders. I personally grew up in the European Union, and I never really saw a difference between Belgium or Germany, and all of a sudden it's COVID, and a lot of families who've operated in this border territory can no longer connect. In the same way, what is this family structure in connection to tourism, or in connection to maybe, let's say, tribes that are operating across Africa that don't have a geographical line around them, but that equally operate within a different kind of spatial context. And in that sense, I wanted to ask you guys what your definition of tourism is, and also what it could be in the future, because it has had this negative tone. I don't really feel like I want to be a tourist, but I am, you know, I'm technically a tourist when I venture out of the country where I'm from, in a way. And what does that mean in terms of these global identities? So let's do it in the same order of presentation. But Syowia, I'd love to hear from you how you see, specifically within your given context, and maybe also your time in the US, and the contrast between the two, what it means to be a tourist and how that actually has shaped your practice, and maybe vice versa. How has your practice shaped your engagement with both local and foreign communities that are entering your kind of magic space?
Hi. No, it's such a big question. I have a couple of different things running around in my head, so I'm going to try and get back to answering it. But there's, I think, a thread that is interesting in terms of, like, you know, Robert and Elizabeth, what you guys were sharing was really inspirational for me, because it's we've been thinking, Untethered Magic's been thinking about climate and energy, but we've been thinking about it on a minuscule scale in comparison to where you guys are at with your projects and what you're doing, and that's totally fine. But it's really interesting to see that I guess there's we have a desire to be better with our environment, right? And we keep running up against I guess we keep running up against cost. So at some point I'd like to get into a discussion around money and costs, because we're functioning on like a tiny scale and running, and then we're like, okay, stop, wait for some money to come in. Where is it coming from? Nobody knows. Okay, let's continue. Like, let the little money come. Oh, let's do this, let's do that. And there's a story I wanted to quickly share, which is about we have a septic tank hole. Okay, so we're on rock. So one of our problems is we cannot dig into the ground, or it's super expensive. We can dig into the ground, but it's very expensive. And then that goes back into this conversation where you were also, saying about like how much do you interrupt the space, right? And and also what are you building where, and how long does it last, and what does it actually mean to make those kinds of marks, right? And so at the moment we have a hole, and we use a pit latrine, and we used a temporary second hole during the residency because the septic tank wasn't ready. And now we're meeting a biodigester, and we're going for the biodigester because it's going to feed into the farm, which we've had to close off because of the baboons. We can't leave anything out. The minute it grows a little bit, it's like there's a resident buffalo who comes, who we've nicknamed Norm, and then there's a troop of baboons who live very close down by on a huge tree, and it's their home. Like, forget it. It's 30 of them, so you're not going to fight them. So I've created a compost pile for them that they go to. And therefore they leave us alone, but we've had to enclose this. So the septic biodigester is going to feed into that system with a drip irrigation. It costs about 2,000 euros to put in and for it to work. And it costs about 200 euros or 100 euros every year to clean out, right? So it's like using a charcoal, whatever system. Then solar, same stuff. It's super, and solar has changed dramatically in terms of what we can get. But it's still like, we're still like, okay, wait for the inverters, build the system, and then buy the bits slowly as we go. But even this thing of like, we haven't really thought about panels changing color. Like I didn't know that was possible. We've just been on this like I don't know, little track, to get into like, oh, solar panel, that's what it looks like, put it in, like not thinking more beyond that, because it's kind of overwhelming to actually achieve to do. And the septic tank, the reason I bring it up is at the moment it's a big hole, and a Maasai herder who, they take their cattle into the park, which is illegal, but it happens anyhow, and they take their cattle around, and the herder left the cattle and they came into our place, and one cow was blind and fell into the hole. And the dogs chased the cows, and this one normally follows the others, but because the dogs chased them, this fell in the hole. And it was really interesting because this happened at 2 p.m. and at 11, the cow was out of the hole at like 11. It survived, but the Maasai guy, he came and then he left. He came again with 2 more people. They left. They came again with 3. They left. They came again. The whole like family was like, oh, let's figure this out. And there was one, initial question of like, did you guys do this? Because apparently people actually do that as punishment for like, you're in my property. So in terms of borders and boundaries, and there's so much discussion we can actually have in terms of boundaries and borders, because it's come up with all of us as well in different ways. But the young herder and the old man, I have shrubs, and he noticed that I'm not cutting down the shrubs to build. This is the musée, what we would call the elderly man, who's obviously in charge of the whole scenario, and who was already annoyed at his son for like letting this happen to begin with. But they had a 5-minute discussion. Like we were hauling this cow on sticks, and we had to carry it to the pickup because it was exhausted. and there's little bushes everywhere. And the young guy was like, let's just cut the bloody bush and let's move it, you know, and let's go. What is this? And the old man was like, no, we are not cutting we're not cutting anything, like nothing. It was a 5-minute discussion, and I was sitting there with Kiba. We're like, oh my God, it's like 11 o'clock at night. This poor thing, we don't want it to die. Can we move? But there's this very different way of thinking about the environment that's already happening between generations. In I have to probably give you guys a bit of background. The Maasai culture is very, very deeply knowledgeable about the environment and taking care of the environment. But even within their generations, there's already a shift and a gap. Anyhow, I wanted to put that out there, and we can pick that up again. And then in terms of tourism, I have no idea what my definition of tourism is. I also have this icky relationship to the word. I think it's the language. I think it's the ostracization that can happen. And I think it's also the behavior of tourists that I've witnessed. I think it's also as a child on the beach, I would sneak into a hotel and go swimming. And my father, as a Black man, couldn't enter the hotel in his own country because he wasn't a white tourist, right? There's a whole layered navigation around that word. I think there's also a history or a relationship I have with the word, because tourists have often come with exceptional means into Kenya, and all of a sudden your $1 can take you 10 steps further than it can in your home country, and there's a certain tendency to behave in a certain way with that kind of like, oh, I'm being treated like a king. There's also a misunderstanding of like, not everybody coming and visiting the country is uber wealthy and rich. There's a lot of nuances. I think it's far too huge to unpack. I think I don't know if I've traveled and operated as a tourist when I'm operating and moving for work and projects. And I think my relationship to travel is pretty, there's a definite hierarchical relationship just on the mere fact that I have to apply for a visa, and I can only apply for a visa from my home country. And I have to have a certain amount of money in my bank account to do so. I have to have a certain amount of assets to make sure that I return to my home country. I have to make sure I have a certain health insurance from a certain company that costs a certain amount in order to even step into an airport. I was in Helsinki at one point, and I was traveling back and forth quite a bit to different places. And there was a tourist, I'm saying tourist, there was an Australian man who was traveling to America, and he didn't have a visa at the gate to get into the airplane. And I was like, panic, my whole heart was like, oh my God, what the hell? How can you not have a visa, right? And the woman at the counter was like, oh, we'll sort you out. You can just go online and fill out this form and then you'll be fine. And I was like, what? Like, that doesn't happen to me. Like, shit, I'd be like deported. I'd be like handcuffed. I'd be like, so I can't answer. I can't give you a definition. Maybe I've just given you a series of nuances that we can plow through.
I think you've actually added some really important questions, which is on the one hand that tourism rather be more so of a state of mind or operations or behavior rather than a being, and that it's privy to definitely class, race, and economic kind of setups in that way. And I like how you said that, in a way, when I've traveled, I don't think I was a tourist, because I think it is important for us not just to feel icky, but to diversify what it means to be a tourist, and maybe diversify a little bit the different shades of tourism in a way to tackle those. And because I do want to be able to differentiate what it means to have a research trip somewhere in a country you're not from versus going on a bachelorette party to a country that you've also not come from, right? They're different, and they're different reasons, and there are different justifications. I think one of the interesting things of COVID-19 is that for most of us Europeans, and I'm sure this is the same across other kind of parts of the world, you had to have a reason to travel. You had to have like a kind of government reason to be like, well, my aunt is sick and I need to go travel to Austria. And it was a really good lesson for the kind of privilege to understand, fuck, we just thought we could swing by those borders and we thought that the world was ours. And all of a sudden it's not. I have to file a different kind of piece of paper. And it made us, I think, a little bit more, I mean, it's kind of this like old trick, by like limiting your agency, you become aware of where your agency is. And I definitely have come to realize that among my peers, at least, people have behaved more socially responsible. And the kind of weekends, and let's talk about the art tourism and architecture tourism, the weekends to go see a new building or to see an art fair or an exhibition have no longer really been okay. Like socially, it's a little less comfortable now to be like, oh, just flying to Barcelona to go see this new public art installation. That said, I'm not quite sure what the future holds. On that note, I do think it would be super interesting, Astrid, to hear you speak a little bit, especially about not just the future of tourism on its own, but how you guys are already anticipating the future shaped by climate change and how you're looking at it from a very kind of positive perspective, but also I would say an economic perspective. Yay, we can now like come up with like a link to China, which obviously culturally is absolutely great, but I also know that there are economic profiles prior to it. And if you look at the region, I think what's super exciting is that you're literally on a very complicated axis in terms of geopolitical governance and the tensions between that. You have a democracy on one end and a somewhat other shape of government on the other hand, but you're trying to be part of the same borderland community. So before I say too much, I'd love to hear from you, how you, from your perspective, in your locale, and maybe the condition of tourism is even like based on weather. As long as you're on the same fucking mountain, you're not a tourist, right? Even where the borders of that mountain or that like Iceland may lay. Anyway, yeah, please elaborate how you see this.
Yes, I will try to maybe pinpoint two main points on the question, at least that you brought up. Firstly, what are kind of what is tourism and what does it mean and what can be the positive sides of it? And then I would like to elaborate firstly a little bit on what I mentioned in the presentation as Pikene, Broen, as curators and producers, also kind of that we're also kind of operating as a small-scale tour operators through the artist residency program, and not only through collaborating with local tour companies. By when we have artists arriving, they are introduced to local places and people and issues, but also seeing this as a value as we really get something back from it, that it's not only this one-sided relation that the visitor come and kind of consume and then leave again with new photos and experiences, but also with the intention of leaving something behind after the visit, or in this case, the residency that I use as an example, which I think is interesting because it's also lived this since the most of the artists stay for longer compared to the normal tourist in Kirkenes who stay for maybe 1 or 2 days. An artist would stay for 1 week or maybe 1 month, and this is an obvious kind of answer to or a possible solution to explore for the tourism industry, how to instead of the tourists just passing through a huge or a bunch of places, rather have them to stay longer. But then going back a bit to this kind of this exchange of value that the tourist or the visitor or the artist can give back. I think it's very obvious how we working with art and how art also adds value to a place, or maybe not even adds a new value, but maybe also strengthen and visualizes a value that is already there. as I used as an example in the presentation, the artist Kvae and Bark, who participated an artist residency program and also did an exhibition in Kirkenes. They work with local food but only the food you can find locally, like both in the sea, in the forest, and in the city itself. So wild plants and mushrooms and all you can imagine. And this was also through a collaboration with the local association that work with foraging and so making a connection there with the locals and the kind of the visitor coming from the outside. But also through this project, it really shed highlighted different plants and natural resources growing locally that had kind of been forgotten. So local knowledge that had been forgotten that could have like a boost with someone from the outside coming and strength, or kind of reminding and coming with new knowledge and competence that kind of reinforce these existing natural resources. And this can also happen with, like, for example, also shedding light on history or stories, as we have artists coming to dig deeper into local stories that maybe become an art project, an exhibition, a performance, something that they kind of leave behind. And I think it's an interesting to kind of bring into, or an interesting experience to bring into and to share with how we operate the tourism. But of course, maybe also an utopian, leading me to my second point, which is what Syowia also brought up. Like, we cannot not talk about money or economy, because this was also what led to the urge of tourism in the case of Kirkenes, that the mine shut down, and suddenly you had this huge gap. There was people without a workplace, and this issue of what we shall live of, what is going to provide our income so we can actually have food on our plates and a roof over ourselves is a very basic question that we keep on coming back to again and again, lifting different industries and issues related to different industries, like the obvious ones now with them. In the mining industry, there are obvious negative impacts, ecological and social impacts that the mining companies or the mining itself leads to, and that's shutting down and leading to more tourism. And now today, in a situation with a lot more knowledge about both our us facing the huge climate crisis, but also an ecological crisis, is forcing us to also re-question. But okay, so what about the new industries that we have created? They are obviously also giving a very negative impact on social and ecological impact. So we have to again re-question ourselves. Is it kind of worth to maintain and to feed these industries? And then obviously on the other side of these arguments, you have the argument for the workplaces, which are again and again being held as kind of the glue to a place. And in Northern Norway specifically, there is a huge decrease in the population. So there is a very big discussion on how to maintain the population. How can people stay here and keep living here? And then obviously the workplaces is again and again being brought up as kind of the main argument for sustaining, for example, the tourism industries. Yeah, so that was maybe just elaborating a little bit. Maybe
I think it's super interesting, because on one hand, you're already tapping my next question, like the kind of like different views that this tourism might have on local community. On the one hand, it's absolutely beautiful that an artist can come in and can work with local farmers and learn and exchange. On the other hand, you guys are kind of in like a very northern part that's not as accessible as other parts, let's say Los Angeles or Abu Dhabi, or where I am now, Paris. And in specifically the case of Paris, or where I'm from, Amsterdam, tourism has been this kind of economic pool from, let's say, 80s to 90s to especially after the European Union, where a lot was invested to make it as attractive as possible to tourists. And it went so far that right now local governments are banning tourists. Local governments are making it really hard for tourists to come because it has a pollutive effect. And it has an exploitative effect, and it often doesn't really bring out the best in terms of let's say, resources, whether those are cultural or social. And I think it is interesting that you guys have this opportunity in a way to learn from everything else that's been going on around in the world, and then kind of keep on redesigning what that means. I think the amazing part and opportunity you guys have there is that maybe without any incentive, there wouldn't be as much tourism as there is now. So you're kind of looking at it from a different lens. The segue that I have towards Lagi, you guys, is in a way, maybe without being too bold, but in a way, your public art installations are kind of like the tourists. They're traveling, they come from you, but they kind of like pop in and down, and then actually are kind of like the positive tourist, if I can say so. I wanted to ask you guys how you have experienced with kind of the practice of design and designing these quite magnificent, positive art installations that aren't just positive in terms of like the beautiful design of an hourglass, but also in terms of generating positive energy, where your exchange have been. Working as a curator myself, I've learned a big lesson in the last 5 years, especially operating in the US. You're not always as welcome as you thought you were. Like, these solutions kind of need an invite. And especially when you plant something in an area where there is a strong local community. So I'm not talking about the middle of nowhere somewhere, but if you were to place one of your installations, let's say in a quite densely urban area, perhaps what would locals respond? Anyway, I just wanted to learn a little bit more what your process is in terms of these like grand ideas and much needed positive vision, but also the kind of relationship towards the local community and how they might feed in beyond you guys providing educational platforms, beyond you guys dropping in to kind of like teach, or provide opportunities for learning, but what your take has been from locals and how your designs have affected by feedback that you've gotten from this local community.
Yeah, that's an important question. At the core of everything we do is community participation, engagement, and feedback. So first of all, we work only by invitation. So we have, the only exception is Lagi 2010, when we launched the idea, and it was an experiment, and we were living in the United Arab Emirates where I was a professor. That was the only competition that we launched solo. Since that time, we've entered cities and communities by invitation. And from day one of our process, we go out and glean community feedback. So the design brief itself, that is what's presented to designers around the world, has been created in collaboration with local community.
Yeah, and I love this idea of of art installations as tourists in a way, but in effect they are homegrown by the co-design process of the design brief and the amazing, incredible teams around the world who respond to it with their beautiful visions. And it's interesting in the context of course, we're working very much to address the climate crisis, and at the heart of at least 3% or so of global carbon emissions are air travel. And then if you add other kinds of travel and transport to that, it can probably be more like 10% it's a significant amount. And so it's tourism as a thing is getting a bad name in a way, because and I have a great respect for those who defer travel or decide not to travel, and this coronavirus pandemic has taught us all how not to travel in a way. But the danger there is that we will become more isolated. We'll have less cultural exchange. Cultural exchange from travel is such a means of organic diplomacy, rather than at the state level, at the individual level, and it's a remedy against nationalism or becoming closed off.
Look, we live in the United States, where rural communities who don't travel, I find to be the most dangerous. These are people who don't know how to communicate with someone who's outside of their tribe, so to speak. And that's a real danger and a real problem. So I don't think it's a point of pride to not have a passport and know how to exchange with different cultures.
And I think it's okay to accept that we live in a petroculture, and when we travel, we will have a carbon footprint now, and we're working to fix that. But we can't all take a boat across the Atlantic or Pacific. If we're able to, that's wonderful, and that's a great experience. But at the same time, there are good tourist methods and there are bad tourist methods. And I think that the kind of White Lotus, if you will, tourist method is something that should die off. The going to some resort where you're not actually engaging with people of the place. That kind of paradigm for tourism should go away, and it should be replaced with a paradigm that is more engaging in activities, you going to a place to accomplish something, maybe something that has to do with regeneration or knowledge transfer or sharing or building together.
And maybe in the same way that we're asking cities and communities to engage with local community and insist on local community being in the conversation for the energy transition and their energy landscapes. Maybe there's a model where the tourist industry can actually engage with local communities so that whatever the invitation to the world to come to this place has been co-designed. You know, what does the school teacher want from the tourist? What do we all want from people who enter our communities? And that can be by design, I would suggest.
Before we end, I would just like to address Syowia's conversation around solar, and you're absolutely right. It is a technology that is still on the verge of becoming universally accessible, and it is not yet so. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that it is a technology that is controlled. The panels that are available are usually manufactured in China, or certainly most likely not in Kenya. And that's a paradigm that should shift as well. Import replacement for economies like Kenya, there should be light manufacturing of solar modules that are local, and that would be a way to also provide the kind of employment opportunities that Astrid is talking about in Pikene as well. When old industries die, we need to find new industries to replace them, and that energy transition provides this amazing opportunity. We just have to have the right kind of leadership and strategy to grab that opportunity. Not easy, very difficult.
No, and I mean, we can't avoid the politics behind, energy. That's a beast of a vehicle that is not wanting to let go of the kind of income that's being generated from non-solar power. And also, there's, I think the idea of, it's business. If a company is providing you with something, they're not going to really allow you to start making your own solar panels, if not easily. I wanted to also just quickly interject. I think that in response to your thinking about tourism, I still find it comes from such a place of privilege, and I just wanted to put that back out there.
I agree more.
I think one of the key things that I wanted to add, and thank you for opening that up, is I've heard a lot of the word we in today's presentation. I think before we can rethink tourism, we need to rethink who we mean by we, and what that we translate to when you speak of other we's. There is no global world and we're all the same as one person. I actually have met the most amazing open-minded people across the world who have never left their country. It's not purely this kind of 90s idea of globalization. The more you travel, the better you understand the world. That's definitely a very kind of Western way of thinking that cross-cultural exchange enlightens you, kind of coming from the Grand Tour almost. But not everybody can, not everybody wants to, and not everybody should to be able to be part of a conversation of tourism. And that's also why I think the word needs to be dismantled and in perhaps in a way decolonized from this perspective of it being only this like one-dimensional positive experience to travel and to observe. I really love what you guys were saying though, that there should maybe be this angle where if you want to be a tourist, you got to pay a price, kind of like travel is becoming a school summer camp abroad, and you have to leave something behind or you have to contribute. I'm not talking about the CO2 emission guilt you can tap as a box for €2.99 when you book a flight, but something more meaningful, and how we can hold ourselves accountable to it. I do want to hear from you guys though a little bit more about the future, and a little can literally be from any practical scale, but just hearing how you see the next 10 years in terms of how the world will change and how your practice will respond or engage with it, and what it means for your locale, whether that is where your family is or where your work is or where you want to be. But I think it's really important that we put our minds not just in terms of now fixing the past, because in a way this battle against climate change is a little bit of like fixing the past, but also foreseeing what the future might be and what the kind of social component to it is and how your art and design practices can shape those. I'm leaving it open to whomever wants to respond first, as we're slowly segueing into kind of the larger discussion here with also hopefully questions from other participants and audience members. I wanted to introduce the kind of notion of raising your hand. There is a little button at your lower bar of the Zoom webinar if you want to ask a question, but also feel free to drop it in the chat. And that way our admin can hand over the mic to you. Anyway, who wants to go first between these three screens in terms of speculating a little bit about the future?
I can go.
Great.
I guess I want to boldly kind of oppose a little bit to the way you make this question about the future, giving us a 10 years perspective, because I think that's also core of the problem of discussing the future, that we have this 10-year perspective very often, and also coming back to the issue of economy or economical sustainability and workplaces. It is being repeated, this kind of arguments of sustaining a place or an economy on a very short-term base. So a 10-year perspective is actually nothing when we're discussing these kind of bigger topics that we are lifting here, that relates to how to create kind of a sustainable industries and how to make a shift. I think then we need like at least 100 years perspective, and I think it's so nice also to hear from Syowia and your experiences and the meetings with the Maasai people, and I think that also brings me to here in the northern part of the world, where we also have indigenous people that have inhabited these spaces for 1,000 years, and it's only, you know, starting from the early 1900s that we're starting to actually destroy the natural resources that our lives are based on. So I think, maybe just to lift that a little bit, to have this and to introduce rather a 100 years perspective, if I may. And I think then, of course, maybe just coming a little bit back to the Chinatown festival that we did back in 2019, and how obviously there's like an obvious critique of this project, kind of, okay, the ice melts and this opens up an opportunity, but also it's kind of based on a catastrophical result of human activity that this happens. So it's not only a kind of a bright future and seeing only possibilities in the economies to develop, but of course this using this as or lifting this as a topic was also a way to kind of speculate. And I think I would maybe lift kind of the force of speculation into this, being a part of both the art and the architectural field. I think this has an incredible force to kind of speculate ourselves into impossible futures and make what can make the impossible futures possible, maybe by trying to speculate and see, because that's what makes us see beyond the more kind of 10-year perspective of workplaces and economy. So I think I guess I have to have a kind of a faith in art and architecture or other artistic tools in a way to visualize and speculate on how our future can and should be. And then I would also add, just maybe kind of coming a little bit back to what you mentioned in the very beginning, from the perspective of an architect, that how you mentioned that it's like the architect is kind of based on this premise that we're here to build, and that is our main aim in every project and every work we do. It's about building and constructing, but I think it's way over time to kind of reconstruct this or deconstruct this image of the architect, and rather also make a shift in using our competence not to build, but to use our competence to argument, to not build, as in many cases, because we're not only facing, as you all know, the climate crisis, but also an ecological crisis, with the natural areas being areas being constructed is one of the biggest threats we're facing, not only leading to CO2 emissions, but also leading to loss of natural resources. And so I think, maybe that is kind of my hand note of that, we should shift kind of what architects and also artists can do, not only to construct, but also to be protectors of what we already have, and to protect and be kind of officers for things and the ecology to remain,
to preserve. Elizabeth and Robert, I saw a hand.
Oh, I was just inspired by what Astrid was saying too. I think really what comes to my mind there is the shift from a linear economy to a circular economy, and the old way of thinking about, certainly from the egotistic architect's perspective, is I must place my stamp on the world of something new, and that is a hard thing to overcome. But the future is one where it is a maintenance culture, where we're cherishing the things that exist. We're drawing boundaries between human settlement and conservation of natural systems. And just as we can not afford to build one new coal-fired power plant starting yesterday, we cannot afford to expand our boundaries of suburbs and yesterday as well. We have to stop, and we have to cherish what we have. We have to nurture and maintain it. There's a beautiful essay in one of the publications, I think it's our Logi 2018 book, called The Lighthouse Keeper, by a science fiction author who is in a kind of solar punk movement about how beautiful our post-carbon future can be. And he tells the story of the man whose job it is, and he's got a female intern who he's bringing up. She's very young, and he's imparting his wisdom onto her, and he's spent his whole life repairing the renewable energy systems of the city, and his job is to go and make sure that everything is functioning. And you know, in the 20th century, the romance around someone whose job it is to keep things working was lost. It became more interesting to throw things away and make the new, and so that really is going to change in the future, and we're going to have much more of an emphasis and a celebration in our culture of the people who are the ones who close the circle of the economy and make sure that there's no waste, and that we're not doing things unnecessarily, which everything that we do has an impact on the environment. On the other hand, we also have to remember that I'm quoting John Maynard Keynes here, anything that we can actually do, we can afford to do, because it is the doing that is what creates our economy, that creates a healthy kind of growth. And so we can't be afraid of investing our time and our human energy and our knowledge and our wisdom into making the world better. It just doesn't need to be done in a way that's bigger, more expansive, and more extractive of things that are that we love and must maintain.
Thank you for this. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I'm totally overwhelmed by the idea of future. I'm more like, get out of bed in the morning. Yes, okay, deal with the day. Are we managing? Yes, we're managing. I'm finding it very difficult to think in that way at this moment, and I'm sure it's just a moment. Yeah, I like this idea of not putting a time in that sense of an idea of future. And I also like this idea of the circulation, the thing, you know, operating in a circular mode. Often when it's like, there are ways that, you know, when there's some things that are automatically recycled that we don't even think about as being recycled. You know, finding a leftover couch or whatever, you don't have that in my context. It's like everything is pretty much like churned out and reused. But then there are other environmental issues that are totally not in place, like the, how do you say, gas emissions from vehicles and whatnot, and certain standards. So it's just, I think I appreciate this notion to not have the universal we in the conversation, that it's not possible. I think there is, I'm keenly interested in bridges, I think, and I'm keenly interested, I think, in autonomy. So if I had to answer that thing about future, I would go more into that. And I think yeah, it's hard to be autonomous, and it's hard to have exchange that doesn't have a power dynamic attached to it. It's hard to step away from our perceptions or my perceptions. It's hard to step away from my expectations. I have a really, it's something I have to work on all the time. So that, I think the moment is my future, if that makes any sense. The moment of being conscious of working on not having an expectation, on working on understanding what are your perceptions, blah, blah. This is where I would step inside of, or attempt to step inside of, let me put it that way. Okay.
I think that's actually very beautiful. The moment is my future. I'm of a similar spirit where I spent a lot of COVID actually reclaiming this autonomy and growing my own fruits and veg and picking up on a lot of practical skills that I kind of didn't know I actually had in me, and try to see this future that wasn't so much depending on whether it's even jobs or these like conservative forms of living, whether that is housing or rent or, you know, all these other aspects, and trying to see, well, I'm just my body, and what can my body do to navigate the future. And I think one of the reasons why I brought the 10-year mark in this conversation is because I feel like it is our job to segue through this kind of larger political talk that's also in a way a little bit like government sponsored talk, and put it down to our own skills. And I think one good notion of skill is for all to consider is, if we're going to walk from, let's say, us four, I just did a little calculation, how many days walking do you guys think it is between one another? Just because we're talking a lot about tourism without understanding the kind of technologies behind it necessarily and how those will change. So just kind of like, don't calculate. How many days do you think is it to walk a circle around us?
Months.
Year.
Okay, Elizabeth. Okay, we have a month, we have a year. Astrid?
Yeah, I guess I would also count in weeks rather than days. Maybe some 7 weeks.
I think
Okay,
more.
it's 100.
It's a
Yeah,
lot.
it's 121 days and 8
Mhm.
hours. So I think that's really good to keep in mind, that we have gotten so accustomed to this access to culture, access to travel, because we have access to the technology that provides the means. And in that way, I think technology and the design of such has and will shape our future relationship to tourism and travel significantly. And I think it's that skill that I think is also important for us to think about, from both the kind of navigating, whether it's snow or ice or, you know, norm in your case, and the local cows, or it is basically an architecture office that has to operate through all these different cultures and whatnot. So I think it is important to keep it to yourself and to inspire your own consumer behavior first before it gets kind of preached on others. I, as a curator, have changed a lot by force. I can honestly say I don't really ever want to do this symposia where people fly in for 24 hours. It's just not making sense anymore. It has to be meaningful. I rather than present a Zoom or send over a video. I also think new technologies in terms of art that are ephemeral, such as video art or projection art, that can travel without bodies having to travel and can travel slightly lighter, will be seen in the future. On that note, I'm super excited that we have a question. So I would love for the admins to hand over the mic and screen to Don Lawrence. And I see the question already in our chat, but if you are able to also ask us, please do so. Let's see if this is possible. I think there is like a little technology now being handed out. Don, do you have access to your mic and camera, or is it best with this technology that I go and read your question? I think you're on. Praxis team, can you help me? Don, can you hear me? Okay. So far, no luck. So I'm going to read this question, which comes from Don Lawrence, who is, as a reminder, one of the collaborators that enabled this conversation. And the question is, how can we create a new model of tourism or travel that appeals to and is accessible to a lower middle income family who has never left their country and dreams of traveling abroad? I think it's a really, really, really good question. Who wants to tackle this one? Elizabeth.
I definitely don't have an answer, but I think it's a great question. I think it's a super important question, not just great, but really important. And, you know, going back to the earlier conversation, you know, I recognize that my travel comes from a place of privilege. I won't use we, I recognize my travel as that. But I also recognize that there are people in my orbit who would like to travel and don't have the means. So it's a really good question. And it's a design problem would be my answer. Like everything, there's a design solution for this that can be done through local community, perhaps. I don't have an answer.
You know, the root of the problem is inequality, global inequality. So maybe part of the answer is addressing that in a serious way. And of course, I don't know what the answer to that is. But another way of traveling is, and I don't want this to sound like, because I also recognize the privilege that comes from this, but reading, voracious reading. Before I ever traveled outside of my hometown, I traveled around the world through books, and providing access to literature is another way of, I mean, it sounds like a stupid answer though, but it maybe a little bit, it's a way of exchanging cultural ideas without actually moving.
I mean, on a like really fundamental level with Untethered Magic, with these A-frames we've built, we've been having like long discussions on what to actually rent them out at. And we had 2 weeks where anybody who came over, there's people who come over all the time randomly, we'd show them the pie chart and like the kind of guesstimate figures we have, and that we're trying to target people who may not can't afford obviously the hotel down the road, and come from the city or the area, who just want to get away for the weekend, because that's really what we can accommodate, not long rentals. Obviously international tourism, yes, but the focus is more on the local tourism, and the figure keeps ranging between 7,000 Kenya shillings, that's like I don't know, it's like maybe approximately 70 euros, to like all the way down to 1,500 Kenya shillings, which is like 15 euros. And it's always boiling back down to like what are we able, how much can we stretch with that? We want to operate from a cup full, and we want to be able to give like spaces for artists from a full cup, because we've been experiencing for the last year and a half running either on a half full cup or an empty tank. And it's super exhausting and not really healthy. And it's just time, you know, we're like, okay, it's time that this kind of works. And I don't have an answer really, but I think, yeah, okay, so one of the things that makes us be able to operate, we were shocked. We did a bit of research and we found in the corporate sector, they only put 2.5% on social responsibility. We were like, that's pretty low. Why is it that low? Like, that shouldn't be that low. At the moment, we've marked our social responsibility at 5%, but we can't actually go higher until we've stabilized in like 3 years, where our overheads and our service stuff is not so high, and our legal, at the moment, our legal is high. So once that go down, our social responsibility market can go up. But it's like, when we discovered it's only 2.5% in the corporate companies in the city, and it's like, that's like peanuts for a company that's making loads of money. Like, there's an ethic, I think it's ethics, it might be my answer. You've got another question, somebody else, anyhow. But I think we are struggling with different kinds of systems at play. Kenya operates in a super capitalistic mindset. And I think you have to take into account the social mindsets and ethics that you're operating within, and how do you actually tackle those? And that's like really the long hard work, right? And the same thing, you know, a different level. An artist who came to stay for 6 months, you know, when he was leaving, asked me, you know, how do I repay you? And I said, you don't. You when you're settled and you're solid, you do this for the next person. But not everybody's gonna operate. You know, that's the expectation thing I was talking about. You're not gonna have it easy. Like, not everybody's on the same page, and that's even okay. But there's an ethics and an imbalance, and there's how much can you offer, and also, you know, we're able to do that because we're owning the property that we're on. It's a different ballpark. I'll be quiet now.
Yeah, in a way, you're talking about this word of like equitable, and quite often that is something that you are practicing yourself, but that is to have resources be in the hands of those who operate locally, and therefore kind of up from the grasp provide these opportunities, and that growth can come from there rather the other way around. I think another point that Robert, you mentioned in terms of reading, it made me think of this term I became familiar with when I was traveling through Russia, that during the Soviet era, so to say, people experienced a kind of quote unquote internal migration, which was by lack of travel and often lack of resources to even leave their home communities. It provided or enforced a kind of internal migration. So your own internal mindset veering outside of your physical context. And I think that is maybe coming back to this larger kind of theme of imagination, like change begins with imagination. And I think that is maybe also where we could slowly kind of wrap up this conversation. One of the comments that's been happening in our chat box is quite a bright comment that we should actually start not so much investing or providing these like larger corporate governmental narratives of tourism, but provide local opportunities. It's often easier to be a tourist between London and Paris and Berlin, or let's say Chicago, Detroit, and whatever, New York, than it is to be a tourist from one rural community to another rural community, and have these smaller interventions become just as important as the big ones. Anyway, I'm seeing a super exciting other question come up, which is tapping into the first question asked. If there would be a new word or a new set of words, I'm going to make that words, Tanya, thank you so much for this question, for tourism, what would it be? Does anybody have any suggestions? How would you redefine it? What word would you use? What language? What font should it be in? I've been thinking, just to start this conversation, I've been thinking about exchange. I've just been thinking about actually travel. I've been thinking about exploration. I definitely think if we use a word that has a kind of like promise in it, that maybe that promise will manifest itself. You know, what's been really helpful in terms of changing commerce, let's, for example, say fashion, the term fast fashion, and how chains like H&M and Zara have become synonym with the word fast fashion, has been a type of negative branding that actually has prevented people from purchasing this fast fashion. So in a way, if we can redefine tourism perhaps through the lens of equitable travel, maybe it would result in equitable travel. Like, words do have power to change meaning, so to say. Anyway, I wanted to kind of give the
collaboration.
Yeah.
Is somebody's right? Oh, it's Robert and Elizabeth. Spatial collaboration, they wrote. I think it's a great question.
I like that.
I don't have an answer.
Spatial
also,
collaboration.
As well, the word exchange makes some sense. Coming back to the point where it's not only about kind of to travel somewhere and consume, but that you actually travel with an aim of leaving something behind. So kind of a value exchange. Yeah, and also this point about making making travel destinations more accessible, it's also, one thing is the travel itself being expensive, and then making tourism, being a tourist, into a privilege for very few people. But also this point that it was pointed out in the chat by my colleague Francisca, who also highlight this about making destinations also public accessible and affordable or free, it being a part of public space. So it's also responsibility for stakeholders, politicians, governments to maintain public space and attractions and art in public space, also leading to this other kind of tourism, being a tourist in your own city or your own home place. Is also interesting, like how you can rediscover your own place. But very often people are do not have the possibility to be a tourist in your own home place, even if you cannot afford to enter the museum or the whatever attraction is on your place. So this is also kind of creating an even greater distance between the visitors and the locals, that kind of and strengthen this view on the tourist as some kind of invader in your home place. You're muted.
Oh, thank you so much for this. There's a lot happening on the screens. Let's end this conversation before AV will fill on us. As I said before, this is the second conversation of a larger series of conversation, rethinking tourism through art, architecture, and community. And next week there will be another series that I will invite you all, another conversation that I will invite you all to join. And we can further discuss these topics. I wanted to give a special thanks and shout out to the team at Praxis, Nicholas and Charlotte, as well as to the collaborators who facilitated for tonight's session, Rebel Architecture Lab, Don Lawrence, Tanya Torgerson, and Samong Haven, and of course our brilliant speakers. I feel like we could continue this for hours, and hopefully one day we can do so in person. Astrid Fadnes of Pikene Broen, Elizabeth and Robert of Liga, and Syowia Kyambi of Untethered Magic, and of course so much more. It's been really a pleasure to talk to you guys, and I think maybe on our own, by just having these dialogues, we can actually implement what we've learned today in our own practice and start reshaping that term and that ideology of tourism. Anyway, a special shout out also that if you want to support Praxis, you can do so at Patreon. There's a link on the site. And thank you all so much for joining, and I wish you a wonderful morning, afternoon, and evening wherever you may be. Thanks, guys.